broadcasting around the world. This is the Hard Asset Money Show. Your wealth, your money, your future. Serious talk about what's happening and how you profit. Hosted by Christian Briggs. Follow him on X at BMC_HAM. Live in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to The Real Story. I'm your host, Riley Lewis. Thank you for joining us. Now, today's top story brings us to a high-stakes showdown at the heart of our nation's economy. However, before we comb into the details of it, allow us to set the stage for a broader conversation about the Trump administration's active efforts to improve economic conditions for all Americans. The United States of America is the largest economic force in the entire world, and it's also the wealthiest country on Earth. There are more millionaires and billionaires in America than in any other country, or so it seems by far. The country is also blessed with a wide range of natural resources that fuel economic development and societal growth. And yet, a massive affordability crisis is unfolding. Huge swaths of Americans live paycheck to paycheck with no savings, no game plan for the future, and little to no hope. Many of them are in debt, wondering how they'll ever get back to square one. Many of them are working multiple jobs, not to get ahead, but just to get by. Many of them are worried about how they're going to keep the lights on or where their next meal is going to come from. And many of them might never achieve a sense of financial security. Buying property, certainly out of the question. Investing in the market, just not realistic. And these people are looking for a better way. And no, the situation doesn't just apply to lazy people who refuse to work hard and use their money wisely. It also applies to plenty of people out there who are ambitious, driven, and smart. And on top of it all, their own government is destroying the dollar's value by printing and spending money like it grows on trees, throwing funding behind pointless projects that don't generate any return on investment. So, what exactly do we do? Clearly, this is a massive problem for a critical mass of Americans, but the solution to it isn't exactly clear. But one thing is clear. It's time for change in Washington. And that's exactly what the Trump administration is working toward right now. That's the whole strategy behind raising tariffs on countries all over the planet. It's an effort to bring industry back to the US. And apparently those tariffs are working, at least to some extent, much to the surprise of so-called expert economists, because the US budget deficit actually dropped in August due to tariff revenues. It dropped to $345 billion, a 9% drop from last year, shaving off $35 billion in red ink. Net customs duties hit a jaw-dropping record of $29.5 billion just last month, quadrupling from just $7 billion in August of 2024. And that's not just pocket change. It's a revenue rocket fueled by the reciprocal tariffs that President Trump slapped on certain imports starting in August, proving that protecting American workers can pay dividends, literally. Unsurprisingly, though, the globalists in Washington, D.C., who are more than happy to undermine American workers for the sake of boosting the country's GDP, seem to be entirely shocked by this news. And this report about tariff revenues is coupled with another one from the IMF, Washington's globalist oracle, which says the US economy is just starting to show some strains after shrugging off strong headwinds for years. It says that domestic demand is cooling and job growth is slowing. But the exact reason as to why demand and growth are slowing is certainly debatable. What isn't debatable, however, is the importance of putting American workers first. That's what really matters. In the grand scheme of things, that's what's important for a president. Between automation, artificial intelligence, offshoring, inflation, and negative pressure on wages due to illegal immigration, the American worker is up against it. And that's who the Trump White House is really fighting for. So, with that being said, that brings us to the showdown that we mentioned at the top of the show. One of the main culprits behind the disenfranchisement of the middle class is the Federal Reserve. It's their willingness to endlessly print money that is destroying the dollar's value. And the Fed's Board of Governors is at the center of a major showdown right now. Although the problem in question here isn't about their reckless policy, it's about internal corruption allegations. So on that note, the Trump administration recently ousted a member of the Fed Board of Governors named Lisa Cook. And now his administration is asking a federal appeals court to let the move stand. On Thursday, the Trump administration fired off an emergency appeal to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, demanding that it greenlight her ouster before next Tuesday's pivotal Federal Open Market Committee meeting. President Trump made the move last month, axing Cook under the Federal Reserve Act's For Cause clause, zeroing in on explosive mortgage fraud allegations unearthed by FHFA Director Bill Polta, but it's unclear what will happen next. But just picture this for a moment. Polta's August 15th criminal referral accuses Cook of juggling properties in Michigan and Georgia as her primary residence mere weeks apart back in 2021, with a follow-up probe slamming her for flipping a third spot between second home bliss and cold investment rental status. Drill down even further, and the legal fireworks are blistering. U.S. District Judge Gia Cobb threw a wrench into this move just on Tuesday, slapping a temporary block on the firing in a 49-page ruling, saying that for cause removals can't retroactively nail pre-office shenanigans, only failures to faithfully execute Fed duties once sworn in. But then enter the DOJ's counterpunch, led by lawyer Daniel Aguilar, who torched Cobb's order as a series of legal errors, gutting Article 2 authority, invoking Alexander Hamilton himself to argue that when a governor's misconduct or gross neglect craters public trust, the president has every right to boot him for the institution's careful and prudent administration. Then on the flip side, Cook's heavyweight defender fired right back, saying that she did not ever commit mortgage fraud, insisting every contradictory detail was laid bare to the Senate and White House during her May 2022 confirmation hearing. Transparency, they claim, that should have buried this story from the jump. Now, as the appeal court races the clock for a Monday verdict, right before the FOMC huddle could steer markets on rate cuts or hikes, one can't help but ponder the ripple effects. Will Trump's move restore confidence in a Fed that's dodged accountability and fueled policies that are destroying the dollar's value for far too long? Or will activist benches keep shielding the status quo? With Jerome Powell already in the crosshairs of Trump's broader Fed frustrations, this isn't just a personal spat. It's a referendum on who really calls the shots in America's economic engine room. Now, here with his insights, thoughts, and analysis is Christian Briggs, the CEO of Hard Asset Management. Christian, thank you for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me. That's a long list of stuff that is so important that we discuss it, and I'm glad you're taking the reins here and the lead on this, because everything you just said is a very highly important topic. I mean, everything is concerning. Everything is going to affect us. So well done.
I appreciate that. And I guess the central point here is that we're in this crisis state where there's a critical mass of Americans who basically can't afford anything, and somebody has to be held accountable, and something's got to change. The levee is going to break. But I do want to start here with what's going on with Lisa Cook specifically and get your thoughts about that situation.
Well, I'm going to have to go into the DEI part here, okay? There was as you know, the Biden administration had a very detailed protocol and a kind of a left-wing agenda when it came to hiring anybody that was being put into positions of authority, especially in a power position. I mean, Federal Reserve is the power behind the dollar, and the dollar is the power behind the sovereign, good, bad, or indifferent part of the United Nations. I mean, the United States and the United Nations, which has been pushed back against us, and you've got Europe and IMF. I mean, I'm jumping already on this thing because they're trying to wield their power and keep her in place. This isn't just about her and Powell. This is the world is really trying to keep that Federal Reserve intact, and the DEI people that have been contributed from the Biden administration all the way into various places like on the Federal Reserve, and having a board member who's actually voting, who doesn't even really know a lot of what she's doing. It reminds me of the Supreme Court Jackson. But at the same time, you've got the IMF saying, oh, the United States is at strain with the tariffs. How do you know? What are you talking about? So it goes back to that same thing. It's kind of like Trump versus the world to keep the Federal Reserve, which is supposed to be working in our best interest. But all the other people out there are trying to keep her in positions. This isn't just about one little strategic move that Trump's trying to do. What he's trying to do is to save the country, to save the sovereign national security, which is what? The dollar. That's what it's all about. And we can go into details on this. This isn't a conspiracy theory. We're living this in the courts right now.
We are, and you just actually opened the door to a much more interesting question to a lot of Americans out there. The Federal Reserve, created over 100 years ago for one overarching purpose: stabilize the U.S. economy. In a lot of ways, they've done just the opposite, and it really leads one to wonder, what should we do with the Federal Reserve moving forward? Is this an institution that's worth protecting? Should we try to reform it from within, or just talk about abolishing it altogether?
Well, okay, good question about Federal Reserve. It really is, when you think about it, it's kind of an autonomous agency. It works within the realm of its own little ecosystem.
Yes.
And there's a lot of pressures that are formable against it, which is what Trump's trying to do. Is trying to say, look, we don't really need this thing. At the time, maybe this was a good idea. It reminds me a lot of the unions that were there to protect child and labor back, 100, 150 years ago. There was maybe a need for it then, but this thing has become a behemoth. This thing really runs the show when it comes to monetary policy. And I'll tell you something else which is scary. The influence. 4.5 years ago, when I brought to the attention of Congress that the central bank digital currency was in fact being made, and behind Congress's back, the Federal Reserve, under a secret program called the Hamilton Project, it shows you what the Federal Reserve is willing to do. They teamed up with the Bank of International Settlements, and they were basically trying to create something that they could then take over the next generation, which is really crypto/centralized systems for a digital dollar. This is a nefarious corporation that's owned by private people that doesn't have the kind of federal oversight that it needs to have. And what I've been saying is Trump is right. It's not just about removing one person that may be the obstacle in the way. We need to get rid of this institution once and for all. It reminds me of the Department of Education. Do we really need that? No, we don't need it. At the time, maybe it was needed. I don't ever think that it was. I think we were doing just fine without it, quite honestly. But at the end of the day, you've got to remember, this is still a very powerful machine.
Yes.
With a lot of powerful friends that aren't just domestic, but international. They want this thing to stay around because why? It can print money out of thin air. I mean, who the heck doesn't want that? That sounds like a fantastic deal every day.
Well, of course, it allows them to dodge reality for a little bit, because aside from just printing cash, there's only a couple of things you can do to generate revenue, and one of them is taxation, and we just can't afford to tax the American people any more than we already do. It's just disgusting to me, and for so many reasons. But, Christian, then following up on your point, for people out there who are wondering, who don't really know that much about the Fed's history or exactly what they do day to day, what were to happen in this country if, let's say, tomorrow, the Fed is just gone, just like that?
Well, that's exactly what we did with the Genius Act. Even though the Genius Act may not be something that's known to a lot of people, and it's a good bill, there's still some things we're going to work around and get fixed in that. But the main thing, though, is this. We are taking the role of monetary policy away from the Federal Reserve. Okay. Trump's plan is to dissolve the Federal Reserve, put that responsibility in the hands of corporations that meet or exceed the minimum federal requirements to issue digital stablecoins, which then themselves are extremely efficient, and that'll create a stability because they're pegged to the dollar. And all of this, where did all this inflation come from? It came from the Federal Reserve.
Yes.
The Federal Reserve on its own has printed money. I'm going to tell you something. What Trump's doing is unbelievable. He's changing the course of history to take away from the ability of somebody that who owns the Federal Reserve? Does anybody really know? But yet they're in charge of our entire world, and world being the United States, because they are the ones who control the flow or however much money hits. Look at interest rates. Yes. That is a perfect example of how they can control credit. You want to minimize credit? You want to slow the economy down? Great. Just don't lower interest rates. Okay, you want to increase welfare, you want to increase a recessionary potential. Well, how about this? Increase rates or just stay where they're at. Look what's happening. So what's happening with Trump right now is, in his administration, and Scott Bessent is obviously a big part of that, with Lutnick, is that they're trying to take away the power of the Fed and give it back to somebody that's going to meet or exceed with oversight. And that's going to be corporations, kind of like banks, because they have to have a banking license that issue stable coins with a minimum of $10 billion or greater in assets. And here's the best part, you'll love this. They have to have dollars and or short-term treasuries as the collateralization for every one-for-one stablecoin that they issue. So we're going to have demand for dollars, and we're going to have demand for short-term rates, that's bonds, because the interest rates will go down, which is what we want. And look what's happening lately. It's working. But here's the thing. It's not working fast enough, because here's a number, and I'll bring it back to you. A week ago, we were at 123.43% debt to GDP ratio. We are now at 123.85. In less than 76 days, we've gone up 42 basis points. And that's a lot when you consider almost 0.5% on almost $38 trillion. So this has to happen fast. We got to lower those rates. And what we have to do is we have to get those rates down, and getting rid of the Federal Reserve will put it back in the hands of the people who care about this country, which are people that have government regulatory oversight.
Okay. I don't know if it's tariffs, just cutting down on reckless spending, bringing Doge back, but we've got to find a better way forward, because we have a massive affordability crisis in this country. And I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts about addressing that in a long-term and lasting way so that we can try to lift more people up in this country?
Wow. Okay. So how much time do we have left?
I'm sorry. It's a crisis, and it's reaching massive proportions, and we're talking about human lives, our fellow Americans, people who are thinking, do I put gas in my car? Do I pay my student loan bill this month? Do I try to feed myself? Where am I going to live? Where's my next meal coming from? It's a massive problem, and we have to do something about it.
I think the biggest thing you got to do is what Trump is trying to do is bring manufacturing back here. He's like, look, you can have one of two ways to buy this product, A or B. One is made in Europe or made in China, and it's 50% more than a domestic product that's being made. That was the goal of the tariffs, was to penalize a lot of times where China was doing what they call predatory selling. We know this, they did it for 30, 35 years in various commodities, aluminum, steel, and a host of things that would otherwise jeopardize or just eliminate our own domestic manufacturing. What he's trying to do is to play the way of which they played with us, is lower our currency, make manufacturing much more, I would say, acceptable on pricing points here in the U.S. And I look at this and I say, it's got to work, because if it doesn't, we're leaving a few people behind, I believe.
Okay. I really appreciate that, and thank you for your time today very much, Christian. It means a lot to me.
Okay, I appreciate you too. And great topics, great show, brother. I look forward to next time.
Thank you, me too. Coming up next, given the economic issues facing Americans, now it's more important than ever to realize what's really at stake in the 2026 midterm elections. And here to help us walk through those points is pollster and strategist John Rogers. More details after the break.
The Hard Asset Money Show will be right back after a word from our sponsor. In uncertain times, the smartest money doesn't sit in the stock market, it holds weight. The price of gold has surpassed $3,300 per ounce, up from $1,800 just last year. Silver is currently around $37 an ounce, a 102% increase from roughly $18 5 years ago. Gold is up, silver is rising. But rare coins, they're outperforming both. The Rare Coin Index recently hit 760, just shy of its all-time high of 767 from June 2024. These aren't guesses, these are hammer prices, public auctions, real money, real results. Follow on X at BMC_HAM for all news and the latest developments.